Are you still trying to figure out that Colonel Sanders' secret painting recipe or something?
Yeah, the recipes the heavy metal team used to paint the box art, nowhere to be found on the internet. Probably should just stop wasting my time.
Now, in my experience, I've found that it is always best to go directly to the source of a subject should you want to get yourself a secret. So, I'm going to do exactly that, and we're going to get you your secret.
Alright, maybe I am getting a little bit obsessed over trying to uncover the mysterious and secretive system that the heavy metal team uses to paint the Warhammer box art. But in my defense, as I uncovered in this video right here, the way that they tell us to go about it, both on the back of the boxes and on their website, is not at all correct, both in the paints they use and the steps that they take. But today is different. Today, we uncover the truth. You see, via a very laborious and moderately disturbing ancient ritual involving the sacrifice of a new Cadian recruit, as well as the feasting on his elbow meat, I have uncovered the confirmed to be true way that the heavy metal team actually paints the Astra Militarum. So let's crack open this new Cadia Stands box and see how it's done and exactly how hard it is to pull off painting to the Warhammer box art level. Before we get too far into today's video, I'm excited to share that I was finally able to have my limited edition dice trays produced. I absolutely love this style of dice tray. It keeps all of my dice perfectly organized the way I like it and out of the way on the table so my table isn't covered in dice. And actually the lid doubles as a second dice tray should you need to roll a particularly large number of dice in the upcoming combat. Now, I only produced 500 of these dice trays, and when they're gone for good. You can order them directly from my website. The link's down in the video description below. A big thank you to all of you that are supporting the channel by picking one up this holiday season. And as I build a fun little scenic base for my Cadian, I want to explain a little bit why I've become so interested in finding out exactly how the heavy metal team paints. It's not that I think it's the best way to paint miniatures on the planet, but it's almost certainly the longest running, most structured, refined, and evolved painting style in the hobby. For well over 20 years, the heavy metal painting team has been honing its craft, making slight improvements to its system year, over hundreds of models painted each year by the team by what I'm guessing is a dozen or more artists. So with all that streamlining and improvement over time, what have they settled on for today's heavy metal style? And what nuggets of wisdom can we glean from this information to improve our own painting? Speaking of painting, let's jump right into it. And I'm going to start with the skin, which is ironic because it's actually the only part of this model that I don't have their official recipe for. My guess is that there's so many different skin tone options and variations that they paint that a single recipe just isn't available. So to give us a baseline, I'm painting this skin using the steps I thought heavy metal used. But don't worry, soon enough we'll see exactly how wrong I was. I start with painting the darkest shadow, and I move brighter and brighter up to a mid-tone and then successively smaller highlights. I'm letting the volumes of the model dictate where to keep the shadows and to build up those highlights. I make sure to go brighter than I think I should for those final spot highlights because it really helps differentiate tiny details on our miniatures, but also because it's true to the heavy metal painting style, and I want that skin to feel in line with the rest of the model when the whole thing is complete. All right, now on to the exciting stuff, the exact recipe that they use, and we're going to start with this khaki clothing. Ironically enough, it starts with a 50-50 mix of two colors that look almost the exact same. Is this a joke? Like, is this not the real recipe and somebody just trolled me and hope I'd make a video about it? And while this would probably be a better video if it were just a troll, no. Odd mixes as base coats seem to be more common than not, but I'm just going to have to trust that there's a method to this madness. And once we figure out what that is, we're all going to feel dumber for not having mixed almost two identical colors into our base coats all this time. And by God, the next three steps do shed some light on this, as they're 3 stages of successive shading, getting darker and darker, starting with Baneblade Brown, the darker of the two colors in our base coat. And while I'm starting to apply it, it starts to make sense. This very subtle change to a darker color in recesses and folds in the cloth add a bit of depth while not drastically altering our perception of what color the material actually is. And the second, darker shadow color isn't that dark either. It seems that we're applying quite a lot of paint for very little effect. But what I haven't done yet is any of the highlighting, so I don't really have a full picture to understand how well these subtle shadows are working for our final product. The final shade is what they call a line shade or a black lining, which I can only assume is a dark thin line of all the most pronounced overhangs and edges. With this, I'm definitely seeing how those three progressive shadow layers are building on each other, so maybe we're just moving in the right direction after all. As we start the highlighting, I'm starting to see the matrix a little bit. Our first highlight is the brighter of the two colors in our base mix. So we get this nice faint transition to a highlight that isn't that much different from our base tone. It seems to me like these recipes were made in such a way that each step is done with the layering technique, and it never really strays away from that technique. It totally makes sense because you have an entire team of painters of various levels of experience painting these models, and they all need to feel like they live in the same world with a level of painting consistency. Don't get me wrong, this is definitely not assembly line painting. Each of these models has a ton of different variation to it, so you've got to make a lot of decisions on the fly. Where do you put the darkest shadows? And when you put the edge highlights, how bright do you go in one area versus another? Oh, and I'm going to put the full secret recipe for each different section of this model down in the video description so you can try it out if you want to at home. And while you're scrolling down to check that out, why don't you hit the subscribe button and maybe the like button as well, because I know you're not subscribed yet. You, James in Kentucky, Leah in Manchester, Robert in Namibia. It actually means a lot if you do. Moving on to the Flak Armour, and oh boy, do we have a doozy of a recipe here. Our base color is 3 parts Loren Forest, 2 parts Castellan green, and 1 part Caliban green. Oh, I don't get it. Why isn't this an actual paint color? It's such a convoluted mix, and it's not at all close to one of the other 4 billion different paint colors they have in the range. And it's the base tone for one of the main factions for their main game. Do you want to decorate your painting sanctum with beefy barbarian art? Of course you do. And the best way to do so is Displate, today's sponsor. Why use dumpy old posters or overpriced framed art when you can use one-of-a-kind metal posters with over 1 million designs? Whether you want to hang unique premium designs from over 40,000 artists or branded designs from the nerd stuff you love the most, like Dungeons and Dragons, Displate has you covered. Their unique magnet mounting system is super easy to set up in just a few minutes, and you won't need to put any holes in your wall or worry about hanging a crooked picture. And the best part is, by using my link down in the video description below, you'll get access to the biggest Displate discount ever. That's right, up to 44% off your entire order, meaning you too can have your very own sweet Frank Frazetta collection. So open that link in another tab and come back to check it out after you're done watching today's video. While this laborious process of starting with the base tone, then doing 2 to 4 layers of shadow, followed by 2 to 4 layers up of highlights, is quite different than how I've approached painting to achieve a similar look, I must say that I'm finding the benefits of it. When you start with the darkest shadow, like I did for the skin, you can have a hard time getting just the right amount of mid-tone showing by the end. It takes quite a bit of practice, and oftentimes you don't really realize that you've lost that mid-tone until you've completed finished painting the whole thing. And when you do realize this, there's often no simple way to fix it. It's often faster just to start all over again. But with this heavy metal style, you're making sure that opaque, punchy mid-tone is there from the very beginning. The graceful, subtle steps up and down to create depth through shadow and highlight seem much more controlled, at least to me. I'm not making drastic changes in any one step and can always pull any oversteps back to the mid-tone by a glaze of that original mid-tone. In this painting style, the mid-tone is our anchor. As long as we put down our anchor, our ship will never drift too far to the east, which would be shadows, or too far to the west, which would be highlights. No, we're always close enough where we can pull things back in to our anchor. Bet you didn't think you were going to hear a nautical analogy today, did you? Unless you're a very seasoned seaman, it's probably best that you use an anchor. Painting with mid-tone first and working up and down from it will really help you understand volumes and how to paint those volumes. Moving right along to the leathers, I'll admit that this is the part that excited me the most. Just about every mini we paint has some kind of a belt, pouch, bag, straps. You get the idea. So having a go-to leather recipe, at least to use as a base that you can deviate from as needed, is a really valuable thing. You may notice whenever a recipe calls for black or white, I'm not using the Games Workshop equivalent. No, because in all the recipes it says specific colors like Castellan green, but for black or white, it just says black or white. That means to me that they're not actually using the Games Workshop paints, because the white is notoriously terrible from Games Workshop and the black, a bad and black, is super frickin' shiny. I think what makes this leather recipe work really well is a few things. First of all, that black plus Rhinox hide black lining really brings an extra layer of depth. Next, we move up to a reddish brown before we go to a much more desaturated tan color for the final highlights. This depth of color makes a world of difference. The red makes it feel like leather, not just brown cloth, and the light tan highlights give us the immediate impression of natural wear that leather so often has. As we work our way through the blacks around the model as well as the dark green for the gun casing, I want to take a moment to talk about what I'm quickly coming to realize is the single most important aspect to being successful in painting in this heavy metal style. Well, in addition to patience, because this is not a fast way to paint your minis. There are a ton of steps for painting each surface, but that doesn't surprise or upset me, really. This is painting to a very high standard. For the models that we all see online and for the box art, they're supposed to get us excited to buy the models. Of course, it's going to take some time to paint them so well. No, what I think the true key to being successful at painting like the box art is being very deliberate about the consistency of your paint. We all know the too thin coats adage. By adding just a few drops of water to our paint, we'll be able to give a nice opaque coat on our base coats in just 2 to 3 layers. And that absolutely still applies here, but only for the base coats. Once you get to the shadows and highlights, we want faint, gradual brightening or darkening. Our paint must aid us in this, and in order to do that, it must be thinned down even more. How much more? Well, that's where things get a little bit messy. Unfortunately, the answer to that question is, it depends. How much you thin down a paint depends on what paint it is. Rhinox hide is very heavily pigmented and very dark, so I thin it down much more than a naturally more transparent lighter tone like Karak stone. Instead of focusing on how much to thin down each paint, what you want to do is observe the paint as you add water to it. Our goal is a consistency where the paint is thinned enough to act like water, yet still hasn't started to become transparent at all on your palette. If you go too far, it will become a glaze and won't leave much color at all on the model. If you thin it too little, you'll create too big of a jump in color too quickly, and it won't have that smooth, clean, final finish. I know this seems like a really abstract thing. Believe me, it is very difficult for me to try to describe in words how to do something that is largely based on feel. But the more you pay attention to paint consistency and using that right consistency for the correct step, the more you're going to see drastic improvement in the final product of your painted models. For the silvers, I used Duncan's Too Thin Coats metallics instead of GW's. Blasphemy, I know. But these are exact color matches to the GW metallics, and they just perform way better, so sorry, not sorry. Then I just hit them with a little Nuln Oil wash, and I was kind of worrying about this part because I didn't exactly find the official metallics recipe, but I'm guessing the only other step they may have done that I didn't do was a thinned black lining in some areas to add more depth. came to painting the base, I decided to drop my anchor and paint it in the same mid-tone first style as the rest of the mini, even though I almost always start from black and work my way up when I paint bases. I did do an all-over coat of Agrax Earthshade just to speed up the shading step on the base, and I was a little impatient, so I used a blow dryer to try to speed up the drying for this stuff. Bad idea. The whole thing dried super frickin' glossy, and I had to come back later and hit it with a matte varnish just to cut away all that shine. So yeah, don't use a blow dryer or a heat gun on your contrast paints or shades because they will dry super glossy. I'm guessing most of you already knew this, but apparently I didn't. And with a few final edge highlights and 2 strategically placed grass tufts, I have officially completed a model using the Eavy metal recipe start to finish. I spent just under 8 hours on this guy, and certainly if it were a hero or HQ model, I should have and could have spent a lot more time on him. But these poor soldiers die by the thousands on the battlefield, so I'm content with that amount of time. Overall, I'm really glad I went through this process. There was a lot to learn and many things I'll take away and continue to try to improve on in my painting journey. I also have a ton of respect for the Eavy metal painters after having gone through this. This style demands a lot of you. The brush control required to get those tiny, crisp lines of shadow in hard to reach places like the armpits and crotches. I salute you for your crotch work, Eavy metal team. One question I have for you is, if you had access to the official Eavy metal recipe for all the models in your army, would you attempt to do it? Maybe just for one of your favorite heroes or a model that you really enjoy the most? Let me know down in the comments if so. Maybe if we convince Games Workshop that this kind of information shouldn't be kept secret, we'd all love to be able to attempt this ourselves, maybe they'd make it public. Say thanks for hanging out today, and don't forget to check out the dice trays down below if you want to pick one up before they're gone. I really do appreciate all that support. I also appreciate all the amazing patrons that have joined me over at the Ninja Dojo. It's because of your support that I'm allowed to make weird videos like this full time. If you enjoy the videos and wanted to support me, a great way to do that is to join us over there on Patreon. The link's down in the video description below. I'm going to see y'all back here again real soon. And sometime between now and then, I hope you find time in your day to slay the gray.
Can't get the TP out of the TP bag. See, the thing is, you keep the TP in the TP bag. Otherwise, you get out there in a rainstorm or snow and whatnot, and your TP turns to mush. Every man knows that.
We'll all feel dumber. We'll all feel dumber.